Choosing faith over fear. Fear doesn't usually arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, disguising itself as wisdom, logic, or self-protection. It tells you to wait a little longer, to stay where it's safe, to avoid disappointment, to keep control. And before you realize it, fear has begun shaping your prayers, shrinking your obedience, and redefining what you believe God can do in your life. You still believe, you still pray, you still hope, but only within the boundaries fear allows. The Bible never pretends that fear isn't real. Scripture is honest about trembling hearts, weak knees, sleepless nights, and moments when even the faithful felt overwhelmed. Yet again and again, God speaks into those moments with a different invitation. Not to deny fear, not to shame it away, but to choose something stronger, to choose faith. Choosing faith over fear is not a dramatic leap reserved for spiritual giants. It is often a quiet decision, made when no one is watching, when the outcome is uncertain, and when obedience feels risky. Faith doesn't always calm the storm right away, but it changes who you listen to while the storm is raging. It shifts authority. It moves fear from the driver's seat and places trust back where it belongs. Today, we're going to walk through what Scripture reveals about fear, why it has such power over human hearts, and how God repeatedly calls His people to step forward anyway. Not because they feel brave, but because they trust Him. This message is about that choice, the one you face more often than you realize. The choice between what fear predicts and what God promises. Number 1, understanding fear through a biblical lens. Fear entered the human story early. In the opening pages of Scripture, fear shows up not as panic, but as hiding. Adam doesn't run because of danger. He runs because something inside him tells him he is no longer safe in God's presence. That moment reveals something important. Biblical fear is not only about external threat, it is about separation, loss of trust, and the belief that God might not be for us in this moment. Throughout the Bible, fear often appears right when God is about to move. Israel stands at the edge of the Red Sea, trapped between water and an enemy army. Elijah runs into the wilderness after a great victory, convinced his life is over. Peter steps out onto the water in faith, then begins to sink the moment fear reframes what he sees. Fear doesn't always deny God's power. It questions His timing, His closeness, or His intention. Scripture shows us that fear distorts perception. It magnifies obstacles and minimizes promises. The spies sent into the promised land all saw the same giants, but fear told 10 of them that obedience would cost too much. Fear rarely says, God can't. More often it whispers, God might not, or not for you, or not now. That is why fear is so persuasive. It sounds reasonable. The Bible does not treat fear as a sin to be hidden, but as a signal to be addressed. God's repeated words, do not be afraid, or not commands spoken from a distance. They are reassurances spoken in proximity. I am with you. I will go before you. I will not leave you. Fear loses its grip not when circumstances change, but when presence is remembered. In Scripture, fear fades when people realize they are not alone. Understanding fear biblically means recognizing its pattern. Fear shows up when control feels threatened, when outcomes are unclear, and when obedience requires trust beyond what is. It is not proof of weak faith. It is proof that faith is being tested. The question Scripture keeps placing before us is not whether fear will come, but which voice we allow to lead when it does. Number 2, what it truly means to choose faith. Faith in the Bible is never presented as a feeling you wait for. It is a decision you act on. Hebrews describes faith as confidence in what is hoped for and assurance about what is not seen. That means faith operates in the absence of evidence, not the presence of certainty. If everything were clear, faith would not be required. Choosing faith does not mean fear disappears. It means fear no longer has authority. Abraham still had questions when he left his home. Moses still felt inadequate when he stood before Pharaoh. Esther still knew the risk when she approached the king. Faith did not remove the danger. It overruled fear's right to decide. One of the most misunderstood truths in Scripture is that faith often looks ordinary. It looks like obedience without applause. It looks like trusting God one step at a time without knowing the full plan. Faith is rarely loud. It is steady. It moves forward quietly, while fear demands immediate reassurance. When faith and fear collide, there is always a moment of choice. That moment may last seconds or stretch into years, but it is there. Will you act based on what fear predicts or on what God has promised? Scripture shows that faith is expressed through obedience long before results appear. Noah builds before rain. Joshua marches before walls fall. The disciples follow before they understand. Faith is not blind optimism. It is informed trust. It remembers God's character when circumstances are unclear. It leans on what God has already proven when the future feels uncertain. Choosing faith means placing weight on God's faithfulness rather than your ability to control outcomes. The Bible makes this clear. Faith does not require full clarity, only willingness. God rarely explains everything, but He always reveals enough for the next. When you choose faith, you are not claiming certainty. You are declaring trust, and Scripture consistently shows that God honors that choice, not always by removing fear immediately, but by meeting His people in the middle of. Number 3, living a life where faith leads and fear follows. Choosing faith is not a single decision made once. It is a posture learned over time. Scripture shows that faith grows through repetition, through daily moments where fear presents itself and faith quietly answers. Most of life is lived in these small spaces, not at the Red Sea, not in the lion's den, but in ordinary decisions where trust feels costly and reassurance feels absent. When faith leads, prayer changes. Prayer is no longer a way to manage anxiety or control outcomes. It becomes an act of surrender. The Bible reveals that prayer does not always remove the weight immediately, but it realigns the heart. Peace in Scripture often arrives before circumstances shift, because faith has already changed who is in charge. Fear says, I need certainty before I move. Faith says, I will move because God is with me. Living by faith also means learning to walk while waiting. Many biblical figures obeyed long before they saw fulfillment. Joseph carried promises through years of silence. David was anointed king, but returned to the fields. Waiting does not mean faith has failed. It often means faith is being strengthened. Fear grows restless in waiting, but faith learns endurance. There are seasons when God feels quiet, and fear tries to fill that silence with assumptions. Scripture teaches that silence is not absent. God was still guiding Israel in the wilderness, still shaping hearts when nothing seemed to change. Faith trusts that God is working even when evidence is thin and emotions are unreliable. A life led by faith becomes a testimony without word. Others notice steadiness where panic would make sense, courage where retreat would feel safer. Faith becomes visible not through perfection, but through perseverance. Over time, fear does not disappear, but it learns its place. It no longer commands, it follows. The Bible shows that faith matures through testing. Every step taken in trust expands capacity for the next one. When fear arises again, and it will, it finds a heart that has already seen God prove Himself. Living this way does not make life easier, but it makes it anchored. Faith leads, fear follows, and God remains faithful through it all. Fear never completely stops knocking. Even after moments of great faith, it finds new ways to return, new questions to raise, new uncertainties to point out. The Bible never promises a life without fear, but it consistently promises a life that does not have to be ruled by it. Again and again, Scripture reveals that fear loses its power when it is no longer allowed to decide the direction of your step. Choosing faith is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming anchored. Over time, faith reframes fear. It turns it into a reminder that you are being invited to trust God at a deeper level. Looking back through Scripture, God's faithfulness becomes clear, not in the absence of struggle, but in His presence within it. Every story of obedience becomes evidence that He keeps His word. What begins as a difficult choice slowly becomes a way of living. Faith grows quieter but strong. Trust deepens. Fear still speaks, but its voice grows weaker as God's faithfulness grows louder through experience. The path of faith is rarely predictable, but it is always purposeful. Today, the invitation remains the same as it was for those before us. Step forward not because fear has vanished, but because God is faithful. Choose faith in this moment, not when conditions feel safer. Scripture assures us that when we place our trust in Him, we are never walking alone.